Welcome, everyone. I'm Michelle Cobb, publisher of Audiophile Magazine, the #1 source for audiobook reviews in the world. And I'm very excited today because we have a conversation with author and audiobook narrator, Wil Wheaton. So let me introduce him and his book. Wil Wheaton is a highly acclaimed producer, narrator, and actor who has appeared in dozens of films and TV series. Most recently, he played a fictionalized version of himself on CBS's The Big Bang Theory. Also an accomplished voice actor, Wil has lent his talents to animated series including Family Guy, Teen Titans, Guardians of the Galaxy, and Batman, The Brave and the Bold. His audiobook narrations of Ernest Cline's Ready Player One debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list and was one of Goodreads' 10 best narrator and audiobook pairings of all times. He has also lent his books to titles by John Scalzi, Randall Munroe, Andy Weir, and Joe Hill. And when he isn't acting, narrating, or podcasting, Wil is writing a lot. All right, I will remind everyone that you are watching this on Audiophile's YouTube channel, and you can see lots of different videos there and webinars. And remind you that we have 2 podcasts, Behind the Mic, which is where we review audiobooks on a daily basis, and Audiobook Break, which is where we play an audiobook over a period of months. We'll be starting that up again in fall 2022. But if you're not listening right now to the Audiobook Break podcast, you are missing Pride and Prejudice. So get your listen on with that. All right. Hi, Wil. We're so excited to have you here today to talk about your book.
Thank you.
And of course, we're going to transition. We're talking about the transition to the audio format because this was unique.
Okay.
And we love that we're talking to you because you have this perspective not only as an author, but also as an audiobook narrator outside of your own work. So let's dive right in. Let's talk about your book, Still Just a Geek. This takes you back to your original work, Just a Geek, which was published in 2004. So tell us a little bit about how you put together the first work in 2004.
When I wrote Just a Geek in 2004, it was actually in response to a ton of external pressure and a bit of internal pressure, but a ton of external pressure and expectation to collect what I had done as a blogger and convert it into a book. There was this expectation that I wasn't a, quote, real writer if I weren't published in a book. I really rejected that paradigm then, but I felt like I had no choice. And I felt like if I am going to continue to go down this road in my life where I really feel like I'm falling in love with being a writer and a storyteller, then I should do this. So we collected a bunch of my blog posts, and that put together a very incomplete narrative, but a narrative nevertheless. And it was published, and it reached a small audience that really liked it, but that was about it, and it was done. And then about 2 years ago, I was discussing doing a different work, an original work of fiction with an editor. And he said, I really like your book, Just a Geek. And I feel like it is unfinished. And I feel like there's just so much more to you now than then. And I read it then and really loved it. I read it now. I see places where it's problematic, but I also see places where you're going to recognize things you did not see back then. And he said, I think it would be really interesting for you and for readers to go through Wil Wheaton turning 30 as viewed through the eyes and experiences of Wil Wheaton, who is turning 50. And that was how the book kind of all came together. The first half of Still Just a Geek is the original book from 2004, annotated and updated. Think of it as a conversation. Think of it as me pulling that memoir off the shelf from 2004 and starting to read it, and then at various moments throughout the narrative, stopping to kind of look up and say, I just wanted to talk about this a little bit more in depth. This is where the audio format was incredibly vibrant, and I really think, so I'm very grateful that the book is a New York Times bestseller. I'm thrilled about that. It is something I never in a million years thought would happen. That is amazing. And I'm thrilled that so many people are really spending time with and finding something meaningful in the text. But there is something even more when it is me reading it and narrating it and really bringing it all to life. And that conversational aspect of it that's so important to me, really, I think, shines through in that format in a way that it doesn't, like on a 10-point scale, like it's a 10 when I'm reading it because it's me talking, and it's probably at like a 7 or an 8 when you're reading it yourself.
Well, I would say as a listener, I think it would make it harder to read in print because of all those annotations. So like you have to sort of stop and make the choice. And part of why I liked the audio, obviously hearing it in your voice is preferable, but also you kind of gave me the thread of when to look where, as it were.
Thank you. I have to share 100% of that credit with Gabrielle DeCure, who directed me. Gabrielle works out at Skyboat, and I have had the extraordinary privilege of working with her on every audiobook that has mattered in my career. Every audiobook that has gotten any kind of notice has, with the only exception being Ready Player One. And that was because I was like, I really want to work with Gabrielle. And the publisher at the time was like, well, we're not paying for her. We're doing this instead. And I was like, all right. And we got something great out of it. But when Gabrielle and I work together, something synergistic happens that I don't fully understand. And it really exploded into its full potential on this particular project. This project is so personal. And in order for it to live, I have to be willing to be vulnerable, and I have to be willing to revisit and emotionally experience the absolute worst moments of my life to this to date. And I could not have done that with any other director. I could not have done that with someone who had not been part of my personal and professional life for well over 10 years, who I could say, listen, I trust you. I feel like this is too raw and too vulnerable, and it's going to make the reader really uncomfortable. And Gabrielle said, it makes you uncomfortable. And that means it's real. And that means the listener is going to be in that emotional place with you. And that's where we want them to be. And based on all the feedback I've gotten from people who have listened to the book, she was right.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And she's an audiobook narrator in her own right. So she's bringing that understanding of performing and when to, bring it in and when to emote, as it were.
Yeah. And I will share, just because I think it's cool. This is a thing that I didn't even know until we were working on Still Just a Geek. We had stopped down in the booth at some point, and we just kind of chat, sometimes. And I don't remember how it came up, but I was talking about how one of my earliest jobs was audiobook narrations, was a short story called Why I Left Carrie's All Night Hamburger Stands. And it's a really beautiful story about a guy that works at a like a diner that's kind of at a nexus point in the multiverse. And these beings keep coming through, and he's like, I really want to go with you, but I just know that I can never come back. If I do, I can never come back to this earth that I live on. And this guy's like, listen, I will take you, but there's a lot to see on this planet that you haven't seen. Let me tell you about it. And a big chunk of the story is this guy going on and on about all the amazing beauty that Earth has, and all the complexity and diversity, and what an incredible planet it is. And like, I don't know why you would want to leave all that if you've never seen all of it before. It's a cool story. It's one of those great sci-fi stories that just says like, we only have one planet we can live on. Let's take care of it. I really enjoyed it. And Gabrielle's partner, Stefan, cast me in that and directed me in that. And I didn't know that.
Oh,
my audiobook career began with Stefan at Dove Audio, where Gabrielle told me she and Stefan met, which I didn't know either because he was directing her, which is amazing. And I love the full circleness of my career, starting with them and then coming all the way back around to where this, I feel like at the moment, is the most deeply personal, most meaningful work that I've done. All creative work that matters is a collaboration. There is absolutely no such thing as a creative work that a single person does. It just doesn't exist. There are people involved all along at every step. And I say this in the acknowledgments of the book. I think it's deeply unfair that my name is the only name on the cover of this book. There are so many people who work so hard to get it across the finish line. It's not right that I get the awards and I get the attention. And at every opportunity, I want to make sure that people, and particularly because you're an industry publication, I want to make sure that everyone else in the industry knows, like, just, I'm not Scott Brick. I'm not one of those people who are just like amazing, who can just do this in their sleep. And when I get to work with these directors, especially when I work with Gabrielle, just something bigger happens. And at a moment when the industry is consolidating and kind of trying to like cut costs and maybe limit the opportunities we have for these kinds of creative partnerships, I just really, really hope that people who are making those decisions will think about the real non-financial value of bringing a creative partnership and maintaining that creative partnership to bring all these works to life. I know that I am not the only narrator who has this kind of special relationship with a director. For me, it happens to be Gabrielle. I'm sure for other people, it's a different director. This is a thing that I want the industry to understand. A director is not an engineer, right? And an engineer is not a director. An actor and a narrator is not a director. Like, I have seen this happen over the last decade of my audiobook career, this effort to slowly change things, to like remove some of those beautiful creative bulwarks that have made us such a vibrant industry. And I'm just begging all of those people who are pushing to kind of change this and turn us more into like a content farm. Please don't do that. We're making really meaningful, really beautiful art, and it deserves to just be protected and defended.
Yeah, and it's great to hear your passion about the industry and what you're doing within it. I can say, we at Audiophile are starting to see a lot of titles that are full cast, and I love that those interactions. So there is, I think, some changes in the industry, but we're starting to see a lot of really cool things coming out that are a bit different than we've seen before.
My very first ever full cast recording that I listened to was World War Z.
Oh, yes.
Before they did the unabridged version, so the really early one. And I was just, I was interested in the elevator pitch of that novel. Like, I was on board right away, and I started listening to it. And I just, the only reason I didn't go all the way through is that I had to like eat and sleep. And years later, I ran into Max Brooks at Comic-Con, and I was like, oh my God, Max Brooks. The audiobook of World War Z is one of the most amazing things I've ever experienced in my life. And he said, we did that because I listened to an anthology that you were in.
Wow.
And each story had a different narrator. It was the anthology Stefan directed with Harry's All Night Hamburger Stand.
So really, everything has truly come full circle for you.
Right? So how cool is it that story, that hamburger stand story, is about a nexus point where everything comes together, and the dude's like, I'll take you out of here, but I think you really want to stay and explore what is to be explored. And just like, if you choose to embrace the symbolism and the narrative of that and just decide to like accept the crystalline structure we can assemble from those pieces, I think it's pretty cool.
So now I will always think of Wil Wheaton as the nexus of the audiobook universe. So I'm curious, as you were working with Gabrielle, and she pointed this out, which I listened to, it has that special introduction for the audio. Yeah. So did you write that together, or was it,
I wrote that after we were done.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
We were, I feel like it was 5 days. It was either 5 or 6 days, I think. I don't remember specifically how long it was. It was hard. There were days that were really, really, really hard.
I bet.
I would come home just wrung out. I had to take 2 days off in the middle of the record because I was just spent. I couldn't. And it's about, I feel like I was toward the end of the second day, maybe the middle of the third day. And we were just, talking while she was changing CDs. And I said, I feel like I need to do an introduction specifically for this edition that just tells the listener what to expect and just sort of sets the listener up to be in a place where they can receive this type of story told in this type of way. And I wrote it, I emailed it, and I said, do you have any notes? Do you have any feedback? Do you have any ideas? And she was like, I really think that's great. Like, let's just do it. And I trust that I have the ability to communicate ideas to people. And I trust that the people who are choosing to buy this stuff are willing to, take a couple of steps toward me to meet me so that I can tell them the story. And that introduction came together really well to do that. And it ended up being a really valuable and helpful way for me to talk about the print book. What I'm telling people about it being a conversation came out of that introduction I wrote for the audiobook. I also experienced something profound during the recording of this. In the afterword of the print edition of the book, which I wrote, I don't remember, and my computer is stacked on top of some of my books. I could pull a book out and look at it, but I'm not going to do that. I wrote that I had hoped that writing this book would really be cathartic, and it was actually just re-traumatizing. And there's a footnote for that says, well, since I wrote that, I have found the catharsis. The catharsis was in the narration. The catharsis was in saying it all out loud. There's a moment in this book, in the William fucking Shatner story, where I come back to my set after being treated really cruelly and dismissively by one of my heroes. And my costumer, Mandy, says, what's wrong? And in the book, I say, I don't want to say it out loud. Saying it out loud makes it real. Saying all the things that I wrote in this book out loud made it real in a way that was healing and cathartic, because I was giving a voice to all the versions of myself that were silenced by my abusive father, by my manipulative, selfish mother, and by the reality of being a child with absolutely nobody looking out for me in an extremely predatory industry. I'm real lucky. I'm real lucky that I wasn't like sexually abused. I'm really lucky that I wasn't I wasn't exposed to situations where I could be using drugs or engaging in really reckless, dangerous behavior with long-term consequences. I'm really lucky that I avoided that. I think the primary reason I avoided all of that was that I was just a nerd who played board games with my friends, and I didn't like being at parties where, risky behavior would have been available to me. And I also loved the cast of Star Trek: The Next Generation so much, I didn't want to let them down. I knew at some level that I could reach them in a way that my parents refused to see me, that they saw me in a way that I wasn't seen in my home. And I had this thing, and this is a thread that runs through the book, where I was just like, this will be the thing that gets my dad to love me. No, okay, this will be the thing that gets my dad. Nope, that's not. Okay, maybe if I hate myself as much as he hates me, then nope, that didn't work either. And then also through all of that, well, I better take care of mom's feelings, because the only time I get any attention at all from her is when I'm being a famous actor, because that's what she cares about. And I'm not getting anything from dad. So I'm only going, the only place in my life I get positive attention, validation, or anything at all is when I'm doing this thing that's really important to her. And by the time I was like 18, 19, 20, I really resented that. I just deeply resented it. And I was like, what about me? What is my dream? I don't know. What do I want to do with my life? And out of all of that came me writing a blog, because it was this place where I could tell my story, as amateurish and clunky and cringy as it is in its early stages. You know, you don't make fun of a kid when he's learning how to walk. When a kid falls off a bike, you're not like, ha ha, you should never try that again, right? You're like, let me help you. Get up on this bike and go again. You're going to do this. You've got it. And the first year of my blog is kind of like that. I don't remember if I wrote this in a footnote or not. I know that I've written it in my private notes to myself. And it goes something like, I just kind of wish a lot of this hadn't happened in public.
Yeah.
Like, it's good stuff. It needed to happen. It was important. It's been really beautiful and growing and all that and great. And I know that my story has been able to be like inspirational for other people, and that I hear from people that they feel seen because I am open about what is going on with me, and if what people are telling me mirrors my experience, when I see a person I admire talk about their challenges with mental health and their challenges with just like figuring out where they fit in the world, it makes me feel so much less alone and so much less weird. I don't feel like a weird alien as much as I usually do. So finding that voice and being able to talk about all of that stuff was really helpful to me in ways, saying it out loud for the audiobook made it all real in ways that just writing it didn't. And by giving, especially the 13-year-old me who was so neglected and abandoned and indefensibly abused on the set of The Curse, for me to stand up and say, you know what? I have participated in your lie about this for my entire life. I've buried my truth and I've buried my suffering because it was embarrassing to you, Mom. And I'm not doing that anymore. You did this. You participated in this and then you lied about it. And that little piece, it turns out that was a really, 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 that was a deep, twisted knife in my soul. And even writing it just let me know where the knife was. Saying it out loud for the book, for the audiobook, let me find it and take it out. And the take that's in the book is the only take we did. I asked Gabrielle if it was too much. I felt like it was too much. And she said she didn't think so. And that was an instance where having a director I know and love and trust was really important.
Absolutely. It was fascinating to listen to your journey, and you've talked here about revisiting your younger self and those traumas, and to hear that it is actually the speaking aloud that allows you to release some of that. That's absolutely amazing.
There's something psychological about it that I don't understand. There's a thing that happens to us physically. It has to do with the resonance of our voice in our chest and the air going through our bodies. There's a whole weird thing. And it's one of those things where like, I can't tell where science stops and crystal bullshit begins. But it made a lot of sense to me. And I came home from work that day and my wife asked me how I was doing. And I just broke down into sobs. And I was like, I'm so tired. And this was so hard. And I just feel all of it. I feel everything I carried so my mother could avoid being embarrassed. I'm not carrying it anymore. and talking about it is what did it.
That's something I did not expect to discover today, the additional power of audiobooks for the person reading their own life story. Amazing.
Yeah. I don't know if it's like that for everyone or for anyone else, but that is very much how it was for me.
Wow. Well, it's hard to transition from that and ask you about, Neil Gaiman writing your, he wrote your introduction, he read it.
I know.
Did you interact with him before that?
Yeah. So I have been a Neil Gaiman super fan since day one. Like, I'm definitely one of the earliest. Like, the people who are Neil Gaiman super fans, who were Neil Gaiman super fans before I was, are the people who worked at DC in the 80s who hired him. Like, that's how much I love his work and how long I've loved his work. I bought issue 1 of The Sandman the day it dropped. I have all my Sandmans in mint condition on bags and boards. Like, just I'm crazy about it. So when Just a Geek was in its production phase, the publisher said, would you, do you want to have someone write an introduction? And I had just been like talking to Neil. He reached out to me when he was doing promotion for either Neverwhere or American Gods. I can't remember which one, the book, it was one of those. And he had started a blog. And he had started a blog because he was aware of my blog. And he started a blog for the same reasons I did. As he told me, I wanted to tell my story directly to people. And I thought, wow, that's crazy. If Neil Gaiman feels like he needs that kind of direct voice delivery, maybe it's not as weird that I do as well. I didn't know not to ask him. I didn't know that it was presumptuous and impertinent and like shooting way above my station to ask him. But I just emailed him and I said, look, like, we've had a few interactions online. He remembered that I actually started the very first online Sandman fan club on a message service that no longer exists called Genie, G-E-N-I-E. It was put out by General Electric. It predates America Online. It was released around the same time as CompuServe. It was that same kind of text-based dial-up online bulletin board system with kind of like a self-contained IRC chat ability. And I loved the Sandman, and I just started a fan club for it. And it became the biggest fan club, I guess, at the time. And Neil was like really aware of it. And I guess he just never forgot. So when I asked him, he said, yeah, of course I will. So he wrote the introduction, which I couldn't believe. When we were doing this edition, the publisher asked me, what do you think about asking Neil to narrate his introduction? And I actually thought, yeah, I mean, if he can't do it, he'll say no. I didn't feel that like, how dare I, which was cool. Huge difference from like how I had learned to feel, right? And the very first time I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do this, not knowing. Then I realized like what, I was like, oh my God, I could have died there, you know what I mean? To now where I just thought he could say no. So I just emailed him and I was like, remember when you wrote the introduction for Just a Geek? I'm doing an update. I'm doing an audiobook. I would love for you to read it if you have the time. And if not, like, I get it, buddy. I know how much you're working on. And Neil, who's in New Zealand, got back to me. Like, I did the math in my head and it was like, oh my gosh, he's having breakfast, right? And he said, yeah, absolutely. How do you feel about the birds in New Zealand being in the background? And I said, oh, I really want them. I want as many background birds as you can possibly achieve for the recording of this. And like, I was like, look, you know what, honestly, record it on your phone and we'll master it. You know what? Like, I just thought it's that kind of book. It's that kind of story. And I still can't believe that he said yes.
Well, see, there we're back to you being the nexus of everything, between science fiction and fantasy and
yeah, maybe I'll run into him at the world's end someday.
So I wonder, when did you actually listen to your first audiobook?
It was around the time that I was hired by Dove Audio to do an abridged version of Tom Sawyer. That was the very first thing I ever did. And when I was there, was Deborah her name who owned Dove? Is that
Yes,
right?
Deborah Raffin. Yeah.
Deborah was like, hey, come here. And she took me to this room that was floor to ceiling, wall to wall audiobooks. And she said, take whatever you want. And I was like, wait, what? And she said, yeah, take as much as you want. And I said, well, I don't want to overdo that. That's weird. So I grabbed Isaac Asimov's Guide to Earth and Space, um, A People's History of the United States, narrated by Matt Damon.
Wow.
And what's the third one? I think it was a science fiction anthology, a different one than the one that I did.
So here's the real question. Were they on cassette or CD?
Cassette.
Yes.
They were on cassette, and I listened to them in the car. And I still prefer nonfiction to fiction in audio.
Me too.
I still prefer feeling like I'm sitting in on an amazing lecture and really learning things. Every now and then something comes along where I just feel like I'm really into the narrative of this story. But because of the way that I'm wired, it feels weird when someone else is telling me a story their way, and that's my way of experiencing the story. Because of the thing that I do for work, I like to bring the words to life in my head while I read it. And when I listen to fiction, my mind starts to drift and I start developing my own creative ideas. It's just, I don't know, it's just some part of like, it's almost like there's this just like little child in my head who just cannot stay focused on one thing and has to run around. But when you sit him down in front of like something that is learning, he's like, oh, I am here for this. It's just how I'm wired.
That's funny. For me, I find it more difficult to take in things with my eyes when I want to educate myself in some way. I'm an oral learner. So
Yeah.
that's why I like the nonfiction. I still do love fiction and audio. And, you're a father, right? When you become a parent, there's less time to do things. So that opportunity to multitask is really important.
Yeah. And I love the proliferation of things like the LeVar Burton Reads podcast,
Yes.
where like, committing to 10 hours or more in a book is a big commitment. And I believe really strongly, and I'm very supportive of the concept of just kind of like abandoning a thing that's not speaking to you.
Yeah.
I give everything I read between like 50 pages and an hour, whatever comes first. Whatever milestone hits first, I will make a decision, right? I'm either in or I'm out, generally. There are the very few writers who I know, Dan Simmons, who just take for freaking ever to get started, and I'll allow them a little bit extra. But yeah, so I love these podcasts where it's like, here you go, here's your story for 45 minutes. Enjoy it. We're going to spend some time together. I really, really love that.
Now, you talked a little bit about recording your first audiobook. I mean, what made them reach out to you or choose you, or did you? No idea.
I have no idea. I mean, I think it might be that I was kind of like the fading glow of teenage stardom was still kind of like, clinging to parts of me a little bit. And in just the right light, it probably looked a little brighter than it actually was. And that just got me in the room. I don't think I was particularly good in my first couple of things. I think I was probably a little too fast. I was definitely flat, didn't really understand what was going on, was very much in my head instead of in my emotions, which I think is where you need to be as an audiobook narrator. I was also 19. So like, forgiveness and patience for that kid, and gratitude to whoever it was that made the decisions to bring me in for 3 or 4 things back then, so that when I was older and my kind of like modern audiobook narrating career began, I was in a place where I had enough. It was very little experience, but it was enough experience to feel like, yeah, I can do this. I struggled with this forever and ever and ever, largely as a result of just kind of like the traumatic childhood I have, where I felt like I had to earn everything. And I really resented being like stunt cast in things. And I felt like being asked to do something because I was that kid from that thing felt like it wasn't about me. It was about me being the thing my mom used. And I really didn't like that. And my audiobook narrating career, when it really got going, when I started narrating for Scalzi forever ago, I was getting hired based on like my abilities, and I was getting hired based on what I did, and that has made the audiobook narration part of my career extraordinary, and it is something for which I am massively grateful, because I love to read, I love to tell stories, and I love feeling other characters kind of come to life. I love that trick that I do in the booth where I like change my body language in scenes when two characters are talking to each other, so I can keep them straight in my head. It's fun. There's like a performance aspect to it. I talk a lot about how I never wanted to be an actor. That was not my dream. And it's still not. I mean, I'm largely retired from on-camera acting, and I'm 100% retired from going on auditions. I just don't do it anymore. But I've always loved telling stories. I can very easily see myself as that person at the campfire that people are listening to while I'm like telling a story, This is very different from being the person at the edge of the campfire who's like putting on a show, that people are kind of looking at. There's a difference in why they're looking at those people. And there's a difference in what those people are bringing to the party. I never wanted to be the person who was like, hey, look at me. I always wanted to be the person who was like, oh, I love it when he tells me a story. And audiobook narrating has allowed me to be that person.
Well, it's really nice to see you own your power in the audiobook universe.
It's a privilege. I am very much aware that, there's nothing particularly special about me inherently. There are just, there are millions of other people, and every other person has a life as rich and meaningful and complicated as mine and as yours. Like the fact that I have these opportunities, that I am so privileged and so grateful to be on a list of people that directors and studios and authors know, oh, here's a list of people who are reliable. And they're, like, I can count on them to bring this to life. I'm on that list. And it is such a privilege, and it is such a gift, and I do not take it for granted. I am massively grateful for this entire aspect of my life. It's really, really wonderful.
We're very lucky to be in an industry that is so collegial, and really, I mean, we love all types. It's great to be a geek and someone that loves to read in audiobooks.
I have experienced, in the on-camera side of film industry, it's very zero sum, and that can create a toxicity, and that can turn inward. That's what happened to me. And I don't feel that zero-sum experience in audiobook narrating. I don't feel it in this particular industry. Maybe it exists, but I haven't experienced it yet. I've been really lucky to be asked by some extraordinary authors to participate in this interpretation of their work. And I am extraordinarily grateful and extraordinarily lucky, and I hope that they'll keep doing it.
Well, I'm glad you're also in great hands at Skyboat with Stefan and Gabrielle, guiding you through this. So I have one more question before I ask you one more question about your book. So really 2 more questions.
Okay.
Any really fun and odd stories from anything that you've recorded?
When I did John Scalzi's Red Shirts, which is my favorite of his books before Kaiju Preservation Society, which I absolutely love. When I did Red Shirts, the first 80% of Red Shirts is very, very funny. And then there are 3 codas at the end of Red Shirts, and they are thematically and tonally super different from the rest of the book. And John, John said that was that. I asked him, like, how'd you do that? And he was like, well, just felt like this is part of the story and it needed to be there, but it couldn't be in the body of the story because it didn't tonally match up. So I added them as codas. Great. One of the codas is a letter from a man to his wife who has been dead for a very long time. And he is talking about her absence in his life and just kind of like the daily struggle of existence without her. And from a character perspective, he's describing it the way I'm describing it right now. It's like, it is a thing that happened and it was so painful. But I have to go. I have to keep going. I have no choice. When I read that, it was the first time in my life I felt emotionally what I could imagine my life would be without my wife Anne in it. And that destroyed me. And I couldn't get through it. And I was just like, I was in tears every time. And after like the 4th run at it, I said to Gabrielle, I really need to I need like 15 minutes, I think. And I have to just keep reading this to myself so that these emotions that I don't particularly have control of because I am bleeding into the character get resolved so I can do the thing. And the take that's in the book comes after that break. And I just love it. I think that it is, I'm so happy with the restraint of that emotion as if it is a memory rather than a thing I was experiencing firsthand then. It's subtle. I don't know if anyone else who is not me in the world notices it or appreciates it, but I felt that it was really good work. And I'm really, really proud of it. I can't tell you about the most amazing thing I have ever done in my entire career because it hasn't been released yet. But there's a thing that I've wanted to do since I read this thing forever ago. And I just never thought that I would get to be part of it. It just made no sense. There was no way I could hope and I could dream, but I was never going to get to be part of this. Just, it was not going to work out. And oh my God, it worked out in a completely unexpected way. And I'm part of something really special. And I think it may be the best audio work I've done in my career so far. At least it felt that way when I was in the booth. And I remember leaving that day just in disbelief that like, this is a thing that happened, you know? And then it was just like, is it here yet? Is it here yet? Is it here yet? Because I'm so excited for this thing to be in the world. I think we're all really lucky, we who work in the arts. We're just really lucky when we can express ourselves artistically at the same time that we're earning a living, you know? Like, it's a lot of people who choose life in the arts don't get to have those be the same thing. I'm really lucky that for me, it's always been the same thing. And getting to bring this particular thing to life in a way I always wanted to and always dreamed of still feels like something that happened to somebody else. And it's, you will hear me talk a lot about how grateful I am. I make the choice to just be grateful for all the things that I have. I take nothing for granted. I do not feel entitled to any of this. And I know that it could all go away for any number of reasons. So I'm just really grateful for what is happening now. And this particular thing is part of that.
You're basically leaving us on a cliffhanger now.
I wish I could talk more about it. When it drops, I'll come back.
Excellent. So any final words that you want to leave us with about Still Just a Geek that, that our listeners should know?
I really hope that anyone who might find this worthy of their time and attention knows about it. When I was younger, I felt like I had to sell myself and I had to sell my ideas and I had to like hustle all the time, convince people this is worth it, I swear. And a lot of that was because that was defined my relationship with my parents. I was constantly hustling to like be worthy of them. With all of this, I have really fundamentally shifted my thinking about all of it. I just want people to know if the story of a person surviving childhood abuse and exploitation to go on to be part of 3 massive pieces of popular culture, which is crazy, and come out the other side broken but reassembled. If that's interesting to you, I hope you'll give me the opportunity to tell you my story. And if it's not, well, whatever you are interested in, I really hope you are spending time enjoying that, because like, what's the point of any of this if we're not doing a thing that we enjoy? And what I said earlier, what I really hope the industry will hear, the creative relationship that exists between directors and actors is extremely important and it's extremely intimate. I have the real privilege of working for a couple of big publishers, and some of those really big publishers are just determined to kind of stay in-house and almost give the impression that a director is a director is a director, and that's just not true. Wonderful, extraordinarily talented, beautifully communicative directors can be very different things for 2 different people. And there is a reason that nearly everything that I've done that has gotten noticed has been part of this particular creative partnership. And I know that I'm not the only actor, narrator who has this particular kind of personal creative relationship with someone. And I hope the industry will just think about, when we find somebody that we match up with really well, let's try to keep us together. It's good for everybody. And it just allows us, to be more than we would be otherwise.
Well, that is a great way to end, allowing us to be more. I love that. I would really like to thank you for sharing, not just here today, but obviously in the work that you've done and being vulnerable. That's fantastic, and it's been interesting. I've been on a jag of listening to titles where it seems to start really tough, and through time and through the journey, we are given hope, and that's one of the things I liked about your revisiting, was that we could feel and see that hope. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm really glad that you got that out of it. I hope we're coming out of what I hope will be the most traumatic time in our lives. And at this moment, hope's a really good thing to have.
Absolutely. Well, and thanks for sharing about Skyboat and Gabrielle. It's been fantastic to hear about that relationship. I'd like to thank the Audiophile staff and, of course, Harper Audio for helping to make this all possible. And to all the listeners out there, go get Still Just a Geek.